Hello, I'm Isaac Lythiker. Now for this special occasion, I always wanted to add Neurosceptic to my resume. See, I don't believe in psychology, because actually, Psych-illogy. And I appreciate my 3 Greek-speaking teachers. I'm not going to consult them anymore. J-Rose11 doesn't like putting the same joke again every time. Me, it's for the opposite reason. I think the viewers might find it tiring. Personally, my favourite character is Alex. Always in some way she's shy because she looks a bit different. We'll see why that wasn't subject later on. For one of the mental illnesses mentioned in the previous one, here's quite a relevant phrase, generally for somebody who looks into psychiatry.
Schizophrenia? It's a disease of thinking abnormally, thinking differently from everyone else. This is a disease of thinking in a way that everyone else thinks isn't right, and psychiatry has been hand in hand in bed with all sorts of ideologues and willing to hand out diagnoses of schizophrenia to people you want to get rid of, and this is a totally loaded
So the subject of this
diagnosis.
one started out in this illness as one of its symptoms. Later on it was decided as being a handicap, like being born with only one arm. Together maybe they overlooked this, but I've noticed there's an illness with a cause, one of its symptoms, which is also a pre-existing condition.
So for decades, we in the United States went by the American Leo Kanner's definition of autism. Kanner was looking at children who were relatively similar to one another. They tended to have more severe cognitive impairments. They were less verbal or nonverbal.
It's also one of the things I use to demonstrate the essence of psychiatry. Ironically, Leo Kanner is the same person who categorized Parkinson's disease. Then he went around to see if there were any other categorizations they needed to make, and he saw some people who were quite recluse. Now, Parkinson's has been discovered.
And what occurs in Parkinson's is 90% of the neurons in the substantia nigra die, losing all the dopamine signaling in this part of the brain. And if you get a little bit of damage there, you get the tremor of old age. If you get a lot of damage there...
But autism has not been discovered. It's an illness looking for its biological existence to this day.
Pas une maladie, c'est une configuration neurologique. C'est une particularité, c'est ça, c'est une différence.
There's no such thing as either the neurotypical or the autistic neurological configurations.
And one prominent theory in autism research is that the autistic brain might be marked by a relative overabundance of local connections, but a reduced number of global connections. This architectural model of what might be different here is appealing because it resembles the broader symptomatology in autism. Others have found an overabundance of both local and global connections in autism, and still others have found fewer local and fewer global connections in autism.
Theory number 2.
Individuals with autism often experience a period of unusually rapid brain growth in infancy and early childhood. This accelerated brain growth is linked to an atypical pattern of connectivity between brain regions. It's unclear how brain overgrowth and atypical connectivity might be linked to the occurrence of autism symptoms.
This is possibly the closest thing they've got. It's nowhere near a substantial proof. It's about the cerebellum and whether it would be connected or not by Purkinje cells to the rest of the brain. Between half and 90% have over half of these Purkinje cells missing, which is half of, I think, 2,700. I've also seen that if there was an actual injury in the cerebellum, it's not the problems that they're trying to aim at for describing autism.
We all have some degree of autistic traits. Everybody in this room has some level of sensory sensitivities, social understanding abilities, etc., and those of us above a certain threshold are given a diagnosis.
One of the most notable symptoms of this illness is that this person often likes to go around in nature. Even among people who are describing themselves to try and tell us about autism, you'll find that it's obvious that it doesn't really exist.
Autism isn't a linear spectrum of high or low. It's a whole bunch of different traits that are on their own spectrums. That's kind of a 3D weird mess.
Autism is simply a different way of thinking and seeing and, and interacting with one's world. I view autism as realness. Even with people that I care for or enjoy being around, I have to psych myself up to be around them.
Like, it takes a lot of conscious awareness.
It wouldn't surprise me if, for things like love your neighbor as yourself, it's actually a gesture in order to manage to do it properly.
What I'm doing with every part of my body, I am to some degree aware of and trying to do.
Just many things have been described as autism. If you only just understand what people are like, though, it's clear we can see what's really happening. Now, in general, I find that these people seem to be quite lost. I don't know what I would be like. I know that these people don't have Proverbs 1 through 9, for example. And I'm sure the evolutionists on YouTube, like Aaron Ra, for example, they might correct me with my conception of their way of seeing things. If you believe that human beings are created versus the phenomenon that came about may or may not be making itself properly in some cases,
you may find that you are building very elaborate routines in your life, whether it's getting up, getting down, going to bed, waking up, workplace. You might be autistic.
Que les tocs, c'est vraiment maladif. Nous, c'est pour nous rassurer.
Il y a les rituels en général et souvent on a une vie un peu calée, on n'aime pas trop le changement, la nouveauté. Et puis il y a effectivement cette gestuelle particulière, cette stéréotypie, qui est un rituel pour faire face à l'angoisse.
Not all mental deficiency is hereditary. But heredity accounts for more of the mild, feeble-minded types. If carefully trained, they can be taught simple routine tasks. But it would have been better by far if they had never been born. If we want to maintain the race at a high level, physically and mentally.
Francis Galton, the father of eugenics, and he was
And if one hadn't thought of eugenicism working together with psychiatry, it should come to no surprise.
Richard Dawkins defends killing disabled babies and abortions.
It says it's about avoiding birth defects, but no birth defect has been avoided. You've simply killed the person who carries the defect.
So eugenics is the idea of being well-born, and the idea that you get rid of those.
Well, that's exactly what he's doing, though. Eugenics.
Exactly.
That's exactly what it is.
The concept of eugenics is that there are certain people that are an illness of humanity. They're almost saying the same thing as mental health and or mental illness. This is where psychopathy comes from, which literally means a person suffering of his mind.
It's something that you can't cure and you're, asocial on the street. And so it has a bit of a different meaning.
And that's another thing that I use very often. It's two different things, whether you're in America or in Europe. It was invented during the Second World War. So the other people developing could not communicate together with them. And that's why this illness is actually two different ones. The thing that's been told to David Wood is whether he fulfills 5 criteria: unempatheticness, often doing bad things to others, walking around as a normal neighbour. Whereas in Europe, what it rather means is that thinking in a certain way, usually to do with getting on with what a normal, average, everyday life looks like, is considered to be healthy. Some of the things that I've heard as being psychopathic include things like having got to know all of the laws of France.
Malthus was actually concerned that the human population was growing too numerous.
And it's humorous that in French, the name of one of these men is a harvester of asparagus.
Resources, so we needed to control population.
And a radical idea is dawning.
He had a history teacher fired up with the idea of German nationalism.
Vienna really was the cradle of psychoanalysis at this time.
But in fact, Sigmund Freud was a supporter of Mussolini. Not that we could tell from his theories.
Il a fait une dédicace élogieuse à Mussolini. Il a dit du bien du chancelier Dollfuss, qui était l'inventeur de l'austrofascisme. Il a travaillé avec Göring, de l'Institut Göring, pour que la psychanalyse puisse exister sous régime nazi.
Franz Hamburger joined the Nazi Party quite early and had a reputation as a real radical.
I didn't become aware of Asperger's until I was already an adult.
And Hamburger promoted Asperger, was named the head of the Curative Education Clinic. Autism was conceived as the psychological opposite of Nazism, quote, favorable end of an autistic range. As he said, some were superhuman. People can possess these savant powers.
High potential is a very common word in France. What would this be a high potential for at this point?
QI normal, voire supérieur aux autres.
The autist is only himself and not an active member of the greater organism is a warning to all of us how psychiatric diagnoses can be shaped by social and political forces we may not be aware of. Had it not been for Lorna Wing, she came across Asperger's thesis. It was Asperger's syndrome, not Asperger's psychopathy.
This is the definition of syndrome. Ensemble of several symptoms or signs in relation to a pathological state given and allowing by their grouping to orient a diagnosis. Number 2, and I skip over a word here which I'll reveal at the end. Particular behaviours of a group of humans having lived the same traumatic situation. Example, the Vietnam syndrome. The word I skipped over was figurative. Mental syndromes are purely a cultural notion. They're not real things that exist. The fact that it was starting to become so popular and really make its way in because of what people think a psychologist really is, then it was only a matter of time.
So my son Eric was diagnosed with autism, and they were telling me things about my son, you know, that I was believing, and it wasn't until after a few years of being at it that I got some more confidence and was like, I might not be the expert on autism, but I'm the expert on my son.
Don't these people look funny to listen to now?
Opérer des difficultés ou des différences plutôt par rapport aux autres enfants du même âge, de communication, d'interaction et des fois des centres d'intérêt ou des attitudes qui contrastent un petit peu avec ce qu'on attend.
Founder of the Race Betterment Foundation said this.
When I knew that this had happened, what subsequently happened, I really believed that this was the beginning of the end. People wouldn't be thinking about psychology the way they are anymore. Well, I wasn't that hopeful. But it seems like they're not even giving up on the Asperger's syndrome. The last thing I heard was that Asperger's syndrome, listing mental handicaps, is a phenotype. It's just about the variety of things that you have through the genes that you have. A handicap phenotype is eugenics.
Gene-centered, gene metaphors, what I would call genetic determinism.
This is a deep, deep misunderstanding. There is absolutely nothing fixed about our behavior. Look around it.
So leaving all this pseudoscience garbage, let's just think about people as people. And don't you see my point with, for example, someone I knew about before I had even heard about autism?
Original skill and original lie. Your modern shell wants to feel itself. You got it electric now, it's all. What the hell?
My skateboarder friend started our first band. Touring Europe and England a lot, and his roommate downstairs drove the van, and his other roommate booked the tours. So we would always go there and sleep on the floor. I heard Jamie playing guitar upstairs through the ceiling. I hadn't met him yet, but I thought it was the greatest sound I'd ever heard. I was obsessed.
I was in a bar and she walked in with some friends of mine. Soft, very, very quiet, quietly spoken, incredibly polite, timid.
How he was around people. He just had all these qualities that I didn't really have. I was extremely shy. And
she was so quiet and socially awkward and, you know, barely had a conversation for a long time.
I think she spoke to me for her first week. I would say things to her and she would just light up like bright red and not say a word. And I'd be like, wow, this is really bizarre. And then she'd kind of say little words every now and again.
Yeah, I saw her performing in our band.
I like the pub, it seemed like some Pat Smith or something.
When I first started playing music, I was so shy. I couldn't look at the crowd. I would stand backwards, I'd hide behind something. I mean, it took me a really long time to get to the point where I could face them and not absolutely be frozen with fear.
The transition was just unbelievable.
These people have some very strong things in their spirit.
I said this, I want to be in a band.
People who are shy look all the same way as the people who are being considered autistic people. I know you don't enjoy being like that. I wasn't happy for Vivi, but this has nothing to do with having an illness. They would have said, oh, she has autism. I don't know if she ever encountered one of those people at the time, and I really wish she hasn't. And now, and not that she needed to do this, but she's going to show another evidence that it's not real.
When Alison moved from Florida to London, she arrived on...
If they see her now, they never knew what she used to be like.
The doors of the train opened, and she can just about push one out, go back for the other one.
Could you take my shakes and would you hold them still?
Hello. How are you? Great.
It is so nice to meet you.
What are you going to say about her now?
You're sitting on the couch.
I love the couch. I love that man.
Maybe if they don't know what she used to be like, they're going to be thinking, oh, I didn't know she had autism. I didn't know she was an autistic person.
I can't wait. I can't wait to go see everyone again, everywhere again.
I need the way